But next up is our discussion topic. And the discussion this week is we're going to talk a little bit about comic book movies. Hey, imagine that. But more specifically, we are going to talk about um, Kevin Feige explains why he's reluctant to bring Netflix superheroes into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this makes sense to me in a way. Now the article is on Collider where they had this was during while they were doing promo stuff for Doctor Strange. And the question came up of what do you think of the Netflix MCU, and do you think that any of those characters are going to make the big screen transition? And Kevin Feige said that it's extremely impressive what Netflix has done with the show or with the characters. And he said the short answer is it all depends on timing. And like he didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. You can expect them here, like for instance in Infinity War.
He goes on to explain that the way that they introduce characters into the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the films is very it takes a lot to do it, and they want to do it the right way. So in Civil War, they introduced us to two characters between Black Panther and Spider-Man. Before that, in Age of Ultron, we had a preview of them at the end of Captain America: Winter Soldier. In Age of Ultron, they introduced us to Wanda and Pietro. We got the Vision in Age of Ultron. We need to look at how does it impact the films to introduce these characters. What is the right way to introduce them? And that presumes that people who watch the movies don't watch the Netflix shows. Now, here's one part of that to consider is that the Netflix shows are currently exclusive to Netflix. So if you're not a Netflix subscriber, you might not have the opportunity to see them. Like you can go see the Marvel movies in the theater. You can get them on DVD later on. You can see them replay like fucking mad on FX. And somehow or another, I still keep watching them over and over again. But there's only really one place to see these shows right now. Now, I think they did release DVDs of the first season of Daredevil.
Yeah, but first season of Daredevil. They're honestly, Netflix has been a little bit slower on releasing Blu-rays or DVDs of all their original shows.
Why should they be something that they want to do? Netflix basically announced this today or this weekend that they are putting another $800 million into doing original content. Their goal is to get to 50% original content for their service. And there's been some complaints of like, oh, well, Netflix doesn't have all the really good movies and stuff. They're out of the top 250 movies on IMDb. They've got like 40 of them or something. It's like, yeah, but the top 250 movies are not necessarily all the people want to watch. Because I guarantee you, and I'm going to say I don't want to watch it either, but the Adam Sandler movies are not the top 250 movies. But people like to watch them. You know, there's a lot of things that people want to see that aren't Citizen Kane, that aren't Gone with the Wind, that aren't The Wizard of Oz, or even more recent things, you know, that aren't American Beauty or whatever. But that doesn't mean that there's not content there to watch on Netflix. But Netflix is being very serious about being producers of new content, of their own content, stuff that you're not going to get to see on Amazon, stuff that's not going to disappear off of their roster 1 month and go over to fucking Hulu or CW Seed or CBS's thing or whatever the next month. Like this is shit that they will get to control for life. And, you know, the only way you're going to see it is if they want you to have access to it. And I think that's smart for them because it gives them longevity. Like HBO has HBO to go. All of their shows can be there. And then they can also say, yeah, Hulu, you can get these. Or yeah, Amazon, you can play this old series for a little while. But eventually, if you really want to see all the stuff that HBO is putting out, you have to fucking subscribe to HBO in one way or another. I get that. But at the same time, if you're Marvel and you're like, hey, we're making these movies, and these movies, we want to get the broadest audience possible, you're kind of stuck if some of the content isn't available to everybody. So if you're the kids and you're like, yeah, I'm seeing Captain America and I'm seeing Iron Man and I'm seeing the Hulk all up on the big screen, who's this big strong black guy that I've never heard of before? Because not only do I not get to watch Netflix for him because we don't have a subscription, or we don't have fast enough internet because fuck you AT&T, but also half of the Netflix series, especially between Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, is just people banging. It's just there's some hardcore sex happening, and it is not for all ages. Like, you can stretch things in the PG-13 area on these movies, but when you get to Netflix, I'm not saying it's a hard R, but it's very R-ish. It might be a P. I don't know, but it's not PG-13.
What about a P?
Maybe a Q. What's the Q rating? I know that it's going to be difficult to get the mainstream audience to meet up with these characters without some savvy play. Now, there's a few things that are mentioned in the discussion about this. I read an article where they're saying, well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't rely on the Marvel movies, and the Marvel movies certainly don't rely on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. One, I think that's only half right. Is it Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. always reacts to the Marvel movies? I think that's why we're getting a lot of magic-based stuff this season with the Darkhold and Ghost Rider, is because, oh, look, fucking Doctor Strange is coming out in just a couple weeks. And it seems like there's a sync up there. A lot of things, the biggest things to happen to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. have come out of the movies. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., some people say, didn't get at all watchable until the breakthrough of what happened with Winter Soldier and tearing up S.H.I.E.L.D. I think that that's unfortunately to the detriment of the show in some cases, but its reality is that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. needs the movies. What Marvel has done with Netflix is they've made these shows that, while they reference the movies in some degree by talking about the event that happened in New York, the incident, they don't need the films to exist. Now, the other side of it is that we were kind of promised that all these things tie together when they started doing this, and now they're going back on their words, and fuck you guys for that.
There's just one problem with the whole thing, and that's that the TV shows and Netflix ones, they do reference what happens in the movies. Like, I think the first episode of Luke Cage, they mention what was it? I think it was Civil War.
They talk about the incident that happened in New York, which would be the first Avengers movie. They certainly, in Luke Cage, they make a bunch of references to hammer technologies this season, but none of it is, they constantly say things like, well, if you're a god with a hammer, or if you're someone who gets big and green, they do make those things, but it's so tertiary to what the stories are. Like, they're all living their own lives. And in a way, that's great, because in the real world, not everything is going to be a gathering of all the superheroes in one place at one time. And not everybody's going to know each other. The only thing is that so much of this stuff happens in the New York area. It seems like at some point, someone from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or certainly from the Avengers, is going to say, hey, by the way, have you noticed that there's, like, supposedly this guy who's going around kicking people's ass? It looks like a devil. And this woman who murdered some dude just recently. And then this other guy who's got bulletproof skin walking around Harlem. But I'm not going to Harlem. Fuck that. And now there's some other dude who can punch through walls and shit. Should we do anything about this, Tony? Nah, fuck it. I'm just going to make a fucking Commodore 64 build me a house. It's just, that gets. I've said from the beginning, I have a problem with the one-sidedness of it, is because you're saying on a ranking scale is that one thing's more important than another thing. So if the shows can only be affected by the movies, but the movies can't be affected by the shows, it makes the shows seem less important. Mm-hmm. And the shows are to me in a lot of ways more successful because what they can do to build characters and build their villains is so great that the movies just haven't been able to do. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and certainly Peggy Carter, most of all, get to do a little bit more interaction with the movies, but they're not the success that these shows are. They're not seen as great a property. They're not seen as good of an acting or anything. And in a lot of ways, when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Peggy Carter have to accept the things from the movies and they have to react to them, it's to the detriment of those shows. Like the first time, absolutely, it's great that, you know, we find out that S.H.I.E.L.D. is infiltrated. It changed the game on the whole thing. But it was also really early in the series for that to happen, because it was like, here's S.H.I.E.L.D., here's like 15 episodes of S.H.I.E.L.D., and all of a sudden there ain't no fucking S.H.I.E.L.D. anymore. And I think that was too soon. It was too abrupt, but it had to react to the movies for that. And by the way, this guy that we've introduced you to for this first season, who's one of the good guys, is now suddenly not the good guys. That's like second, third season shit for Joss Whedon. But obviously this is not Joss, but it is Joss's people. And that's kind of what we were led to believe, is that it was a Joss Whedon joint. And all of a sudden it ain't. It felt like, okay, we have to make this happen now. And in that moment, it was great. But every moment since then where it's like, oh, we're going to introduce this thing, we're going to introduce this thing. And we've talked about the fact that Marvel has wanted to do and said they were going to do an Inhumans movie. But how the fuck can you do an Inhumans movie when we've been dealing with the Inhumans nonstop for the last 2 seasons on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you can't reference that in your films? It just feels like at some point they're going to make a break between those things, even though Coulson's still saying things like, oh yeah, Nick Fury, he's a friend of mine, cool dude. But Nick Fury never references Coulson again. And we have that scene, which was a perfectly legitimate time to do it, when they bring up the helicarrier in Age of Ultron, and they showed that Coulson is the one who supplied it, who got it out of cold storage to get it to Nick Fury. There was a perfect moment of having S.H.I.E.L.D. back on the screen. Coulson or somebody from S.H.I.E.L.D. could have been introduced as part of it. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity. And again, it shows that they don't value that show. And of course they shouldn't. You know, the films make billions of dollars a pop. The show struggles in the ratings and gets moved to 10 o'clock. But maybe the show wouldn't struggle so much if it wasn't so much a one-sided deal.
No, yeah, definitely. But I mean, and it's, to me, it's interesting because, I mean, you look at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this is where I think again, you know, it is one-sided, but seeing all these stuff happen from the movies, it's easier for it to happen in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it airs weekly. It's not a binge all the stuff right now like it is with Netflix. Like with the Netflix Luke Cage or Jessica Jones or Daredevil, Punisher, you know, insert whatever show it is here that is owned by Marvel and airs on Netflix. Because then it's almost saying you have to create an appointment time for people, like, okay, get caught up and watch up to episode 6 on Luke Cage before going and seeing before going and seeing Doctor Strange. And because episode 7 we're gonna have a big tie-in.
Yeah, but you're talking like that in the middle of the season, which is not necessary because there are breaks between seasons. We have what unfortunately feel like way too long breaks between seasons or between one show and the next show. And they could easily time that so that one series ends before the next movie comes out, and then after the next movie comes out, the next series starts, and we get to see some reaction to that. It's just getting them onto the screen at that point.
Yeah.
And honestly, we had to deal with that with Captain America Civil War, not Civil War, with Winter Soldier. Because you had to be up to date, and then you had to go see Winter Soldier the weekend it came out before you watched the next week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to get the full impact and understanding of that. And I think that was much more difficult because some people weren't watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or weren't necessarily, maybe they were just DVRing it and hadn't caught up in the last couple episodes. Or for me, it was just like, fuck, I have to go see a movie on opening weekend. That's not really my thing. I don't often do that. But I can't watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. again. And thank God someone like Glenn warned me. He's like, this is a game changer. You've got to go see this, and this is going to really affect Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. next week. It's like, okay, great. You know, so partially a spoiler, but realistically, it's more just like, and it's on me to get it to that point. But we deal with that, and we've dealt with that in comics since I was a kid in the 70s. It's like, if there's a crossover, it's like, yeah, go pick up this issue if you want to see the out of this story, or why all of a sudden the Hulk is in this area and fighting Wolverine. It's like, oh shit, I should probably go pick up the Hulk then, if I can find it.
I will say though that this is old territory, and the fact that, you know, Marvel has done this with the comics, you know, forever. This is also still new territory in the fact that you have that I think that was the first season where they did that with Captain America Civil War with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and they did do it to opening weekend. The next time they did it, it was either they gave you a couple weeks to watch the movie before they tied it in. And granted, it wasn't a huge tie-in like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or with the Winter Soldier it was. But it seems like they're slowly learning what to do, like what's okay, because of the fact that they are in this, they're breaking new ground in this whole, well, we've got movies and we got TV, and they're all happening at the same time. They're all sharing the same timeline. So how are we going to do it? It's what they promised with the Dark Tower.
I mean, and the thing is, the movies do this already. Because at this point in time, you have to watch all the Marvel films because they all interconnect. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to skip Ant-Man, and then you go and you watch Civil War, and you're like, who the fuck is this guy? You know, what is this reference that he's making that I don't know because I didn't want to see Ant-Man because I'm Team Edgar Wright? You know, you already are dealing with that in the movies themselves. So maybe, yeah, you're sparing us a little bit of the pain by saying, well, we're not going to also make you watch the Netflix series. We're not going to also make you watch these other things. But it's that kind of half-assing it. That's what got people so pissed off at DC for not having the CW actors be in the films. It's like, we've already got a great Flash, and we've got a Green Arrow just fucking sitting here. And I don't want to say nice things about the fucker who does the Justice League films, but he could probably do better shit with Arrow than what's happening in his own goddamn show right now. I'm just like, you, Marvel, set us up with this. You set us up with an interconnected universe. You set us up by saying that the shows and the movie stuff happen in the same universe. That was a promise that you made. You put it out there and you set that forth. And it's worked gangbusters for you. So to not follow up with that now, and I know there's company politics behind the scenes, and Fahey's like all happy to not have Perlmutter like dipping his dick in shit anymore. And he's like, you know, and Perlmutter's like, well, fuck it, we're going to destroy the X-Men in the comics and fuck the Fantastic Four too, and all this other shit. But realistically, when it comes to the people who are watching this and the people who are the fans, especially the hardcore fans, the ones who are like in it for every ounce of it, it's kind of unfair that you promised one thing and then you said fuck it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I don't know. It's such a tricky thing, to be honest, because you have like DC. This is where one of the things where DC could benefit from the fact that Marvel's already done things, that Marvel's already said, okay, it's a shared universe, and it's where DC's like, no. But I still believe that no is a possibly because of the fact that they have storylines that could happen with um Earths that are I don't know of a plenty, and sort of deal, like I don't know, like they could call it like maybe a crisis or something on these infinite Earths and
That
be
is such
just
a bullshit cop out. Like I've said that
yeah.
from the beginning when they're like, "Oh, it's like we have multiple versions of the." No, fuck you. Because if it doesn't wind up on the screen, then it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
If there's not a reaction of, "Oh, we're seeing this other universe," and like, "Oh, well, we have a Flash and they have a Flash." I mean, they're already doing that on the show,
Yeah.
uh, to much better effect. That the movie thing, they're just like that's just fucking lip service.
No,
And
yeah.
I will accept easily because yeah, I'm a guy on the internet, but I don't really give a fuck. I will accept when you say, yeah, we're keeping them separate because we don't want the people who do the movies to have to be tied up with the shows and vice versa. And let's be honest, some of the people who are actors on the shows aren't really ready for movies at this point. Okay, we'll spend the fucking Montreal dollars for them to show up every week and film this stuff, but they ain't getting up on the big screen anytime soon. I can accept that, but don't fucking shit on my head and tell me that it's rated Cocoa Puffs because that is fucking bullshit and I will call you out on it, motherfucker.
I'm actually going to end it right there because I want that to be the ending for this topic.